shock before Game 7. The Spurs were one win away from the NBA Finals, and then the news hit like a locker room earthquake. Less than 48 hours before San Antonio stepped into the biggest game this franchise had played in nearly a decade, the man who helped turn Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs into a defensive monster was suddenly on his way out. Shawn Sweeney, the quiet architect behind one of the most shocking turnarounds in modern NBA history, was finalizing a deal to become the next head coach of the Orlando Magic. And the timing could not have been more dramatic. This was not some random assistant leaving a rebuilding team in the middle of June. This was the associate head coach of a 6-2 win Spurs squad, a team that had gone from losing 60 games just 2 seasons earlier to standing 1 victory away from the NBA Finals. This was the man credited with reshaping San Antonio's defense, building the system around Wembanyama, and helping transform a young roster into one of the most feared groups in the league. So when the news broke before Game 7 against Oklahoma City, fans had only one question: why now? Why would Sweeney leave right when the Spurs were becoming the scariest young team in basketball? Why walk away from Victor Wembanyama, a once-in-a-generation talent who had just become the face of San Antonio's future? And why would Orlando move so aggressively to get him before the Spurs' playoff run was even finished? That is where this story becomes bigger than one coaching hire. Because Sweeney was not just leaving a team, he was leaving a movement. He was leaving a franchise that had finally found its post-Popovich identity. He was leaving a defense that had jumped from near the bottom of the NBA to one of the best in the league in just 1 season. And the most powerful part? When Wembanyama was asked how much credit Sweeney deserved for that defensive leap, his answer was brutally simple. All of it. Not some of it, not most of it, all of it. So before we go deeper, comment where you are watching from right now. If you think Sweeney betrayed the Spurs, press 1. If you think he simply earned the biggest opportunity of his career, press 2. And if you follow NBA stories that go deeper than the box score, subscribe to the channel, because this one is just getting started. The man behind Wembanyama's defensive explosion. To understand why this move shook San Antonio so badly, you have to understand what Shawn Sweeney actually meant to the Spurs. He was not the loudest voice in the building. He was not the face of the franchise. He was not the name fans saw on billboards or heard in national commercials. But inside that locker room, inside those film sessions, inside every defensive adjustment that made opponents uncomfortable, Sweeney's fingerprints were everywhere. Before he arrived, the Spurs had talent, but they did not yet have teeth. They had Victor Wembanyama, the most terrifying defensive prospect basketball had seen in years. But even a generational player needs structure. Raw greatness can block shots. A real system changes games before the shot ever goes up. That was Sweeney's gift. He did not simply tell Wembanyama to protect the rim. He built an entire defensive language around him. Guards knew when to pressure the ball. Wings knew when to funnel drivers toward Victor. Bigs knew when to rotate, when to switch, and when to trust that the 7'4" giant behind them would erase mistakes most teams could never survive. Suddenly, San Antonio was no longer just young and exciting. They were disciplined. They were connected. They were nasty in the half court. They forced stars into uncomfortable spots, turned ordinary possessions into traps, and made every drive into the paint feel like a bad decision. That kind of leap does not happen by accident. The Spurs had been near the bottom of the league defensively. Then, in 1 season, they became one of the NBA's most suffocating units. Wembanyama became the symbol of that rise, but Sweeney was the builder behind the wall, and that is why Victor's words mattered so much. When he was asked how much credit Sweeney deserved, he did not hesitate. He did not give a careful answer. He did not say the usual polite line about everyone helping. He said, all of it. That answer changed the way people viewed this departure. Because if Wembanyama himself believed Sweeney was that important, then losing him was not just losing an assistant coach. It was losing the man who helped translate Victor's impossible talent into winning basketball. That is the fear now in San Antonio. The Spurs still have the superstar. They still have the young core. They still have the future. But the coach who taught that future how to defend like a contender is packing his bags for Orlando. From the video room to the NBA spotlight. Before Shawn Sweeney became the coach Orlando was willing to chase during the Western Conference Finals, he was just another basketball mind working in the shadow. No spotlight, no major headlines, no cameras waiting for his answers after the game. His rise did not begin with a famous playing career or a powerful name that opened every door. It began in the kind of places most casual NBA fans never talk about. Small programs, long bus rides, empty gyms, late nights, early mornings. Jobs where the paycheck was not glamorous, but the lessons were priceless. That is where Sweeney learned the game. He built his career the hard way, moving through college stops, community college programs, and lower-level coaching jobs before finally reaching the NBA as a video coordinator with the Nets. And for some people, that title sounds small, but inside the NBA, the video room can be where a coach is truly born, because that is where you learn the truth. You watch every mistake in slow motion, you see which players cut corners, you see which schemes break under pressure, you see how great scorers create advantages before the defense even realizes it, and if you are obsessed enough, you start seeing the game 3 possessions before everyone else. That was Sweeney. He was not just clipping film, he was studying patterns. He was learning how to punish bad spacing, how to hide weak defenders, how to turn length and effort into a weapon. While other people saw highlights, Sweeney saw habit. While fans watched the ball, he watched the weak side. While stars got praised for big plays, he noticed the rotation that made the play possible. That is why coaches like Jason Kidd trusted him. Not because Sweeney was loud, but because he was prepared. Not because he sold big promises, but because his ideas worked. In Milwaukee, he helped shape a defense around long, switchable athletes. In Dallas, he helped give Luka Doncic's teams a stronger defensive backbone. And in San Antonio, with Wembanyama, everything he had learned over more than a decade finally exploded into the perfect situation. That is what makes this story so powerful. Sweeney did not suddenly become valuable overnight. The NBA just finally noticed what had been building for years. Orlando was not hiring a mystery. They were hiring the result of thousands of hours in dark film rooms, watching, learning, adjusting, and waiting for the moment when someone would finally hand him the keys. The Giannis and Luka blueprint, what made Shawn Sweeney so attractive to Orlando was not just what he did with Victor Wembanyama. It was the pattern. Because Wembanyama was not the first special talent Sweeney helped unlock. Years before San Antonio became a defensive nightmare, Sweeney was in Milwaukee, working inside a young Bucks organization that had a raw, impossible-looking forward named Giannis Antetokounmpo. Back then, Giannis was not yet the global superstar fans know today. He was long, explosive, unpredictable, and still learning how dangerous he could really become. Sweeney understood something early. Players like Giannis cannot be coached like everyone else. You do not squeeze them into a normal system. You build a system that allows their rare gifts to become weapons. Length becomes pressure. Speed becomes chaos. Recovery becomes intimidation. A mistake by one defender becomes survivable because a freak athlete behind him can erase it. That idea would follow Sweeney everywhere. In Milwaukee, it showed through aggressive switching and defensive pressure. In Dallas, it showed when Luka Doncic's teams needed more than offense to survive deep playoff battles. Luka could control a game with the ball in his hands, but the Mavericks still needed a defensive structure strong enough to keep them alive when shots stopped falling. Sweeney helped give them that structure. He was never the type of coach who only saw defense as effort. Effort mattered, but to him, defense was also geometry, angles, timing, trust. 5 players moving, like they understood the same secret. He could look at a roster and see how to connect pieces that did not seem perfect on paper. That is why his work kept translating from team to team. Giannis needed space to grow into a defensive force. Luka needed a team that could protect leads and survive playoff possessions. Wembanyama needed a system that turned his alien physical tools into a nightly identity. 3 different stars, 3 different situations, 1 repeating theme. Sweeney knew how to take unusual greatness and give it a structure. That is exactly why Orlando wanted him. Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner are not Giannis, Luka, or Wembanyama. They have their own games, their own strengths, their own questions to answer, but they are young, talented, long, and still searching for the system that turns promise into real postseason fear. Orlando looked at Sweeney's history and saw more than an assistant coach. They saw a blueprint, what Sweeney really built in San Antonio. San Antonio's rise was not just a feel-good story about young talent finally growing up. It was a construction project, piece by piece, possession by possession. Shawn Sweeney helped turn the Spurs from a team with promise into a team with a defensive personality. Before that, San Antonio had Wembanyama, but they did not yet have a complete identity around him. They had length, speed, athleticism, and excitement. But those things only matter when every player knows exactly where to be when the pressure hits. Sweeney gave them that map. He made the Spurs defend with purpose. Ball handlers were pushed toward uncomfortable spaces. Weak side defenders were trained to move early, not late. Guards were asked to fight harder at the point of attack because they knew Victor was behind them. Wings were expected to rotate with force, not hesitation. Every possession had rules, but it also had freedom, because Sweeney understood the difference between controlling players and empowering them. That was the genius of his system. He did not reduce Wembanyama to a simple rim protector. He turned him into the center of a living defense. Sometimes Victor waited near the paint like a storm cloud. Sometimes he stepped higher, changing passing angles before the offense could breathe. Sometimes his presence alone made elite scorers abandon the shot they wanted and settle for the shot San Antonio allowed. But the system was never only about Victor. That is what made it dangerous. De'Aaron Fox brought pressure and speed. Stephon Castle brought toughness and discipline. Dylan Harper gave them another young piece with energy and confidence. Around Wembanyama, Sweeney demanded that everyone defend like their role mattered, because it did. A great defensive team is not built by one superstar blocking shots. It is built by 5 players trusting the same plan. That trust became San Antonio's weapon. The Spurs were not just reacting anymore, they were dictating. They were making opponents think twice. They were turning late clock possessions into panic. They were forcing teams to feel Wembanyama before he even touched the ball. And that is why Sweeney's exit feels so heavy. Because what he built was not just a scheme written on a whiteboard. It was a culture of accountability, communication, and belief. He made a young team feel older. He made potential feel organized. He made the Spurs look like a contender before the rest of the league was ready for it. Now San Antonio has to prove the structure can survive without the architects standing inside it. Why Orlando wanted him so badly. Orlando did not chase Shawn Sweeney because he was the most famous name available. They chased him because he looked like the answer to a problem that had been haunting the Magic for years. This was a team with talent, but not enough trust. A team with size, but not enough structure. A team with playoff dreams, but not enough late series discipline to survive when every possession became a fight. Paolo Banchero could create. Franz Wagner could attack. Jalen Suggs could defend. Desmond Bane could stretch the floor and punish mistakes. On paper, Orlando had pieces that should scare the Eastern Conference, but paper does not win playoff series. Identity does. And for 3 straight years, Orlando kept running into the same wall. Good enough to get there, not sharp enough to break through. They were competitive, physical, and dangerous. But when pressure rose, the offense could stall, the spacing could shrink, and the confidence could disappear at the worst possible time. That is why Sweeney mattered. He was not being hired to babysit a rebuild. He was being handed a roster that needed to grow up fast. Orlando did not need someone to simply motivate players. They needed someone who could organize their talent, sharpen their habits, and turn their defensive tools into a nightly advantage. Sweeney's entire career pointed toward that exact job. He had worked with long, versatile players before. He had helped build systems that turned wings and bigs into connected defenders. He had shown that a team does not need to play perfect basketball to become terrifying as long as it plays connected basketball. That is what Orlando wanted. Not random effort, not highlight defense, a repeatable identity. And the fit was obvious. Banchero has the size to punish mismatches. Wagner has the length and feel to thrive in a system built on movement and decision-making. Suggs plays with the kind of edge every defensive coach loves. Bane gives the Magic shooting and toughness. 2 things playoff teams cannot fake. Sweeney could look at that roster and see what others only hoped for. A team that could switch. A team that could pressure. A team that could make the East uncomfortable. A team that, with the right voice, might finally stop being described as young and promising and start being described as dangerous. That is why Orlando flew toward him while San Antonio was still fighting. They saw the window opening, and they did not want to wait until someone else walked through it first. The real reason he left Wembanyama. Now we get to the question everyone wanted answered. Why would Shawn Sweeney leave Victor Wembanyama? Why walk away from the kind of player coaches dream about building around? Why leave a Spurs team that looked like the beginning of a new dynasty? Why trade a front row seat to Wembanyama's rise for a franchise in Orlando that was still trying to prove it could escape the first round? The answer is not betrayal, it is timing. Sweeney had spent years waiting for the NBA to stop calling him one of the best assistants in the league and start treating him like a head coach. That label can become a trap. Every season, your name appears in rumors. Every offseason, teams interview you. Every time, they say they were impressed. Then someone else gets the job, and you go back to the second chair. At some point, respect is not enough. Opportunity has to become real. Orlando made it real. They did not offer him a compliment. They offered him control. They offered him a locker room, a staff, a young core, and 4 years to build something in his own image. For a coach who had spent more than a decade helping other men run teams, that kind of offer changes everything. That is the part some fans do not want to hear. San Antonio was special, but it was not his team. Wembanyama was special, but he was not his player forever. Mitch Johnson was the head coach. The final decisions, the public pressure, the full authority, all of that belonged to someone else. In Orlando, Sweeney would no longer be the brilliant assistant behind the curtain. He would be the voice. That does not mean leaving was easy. Walking away from Wembanyama, from a 6-2 win team, from a defense he had just helped create, had to carry weight, but staying would have meant risking the chance that the window never opened like this again. NBA careers move fast. Coaching opportunities can disappear even faster, so Sweeney chose the door that finally opened. He was not running from pressure. He was running toward responsibility. He was not abandoning Wembanyama. He was accepting that the next chapter of his own career could not be written from someone else's bench. That is the real reason he left. Not drama, not anger, not a broken relationship. Ambition earned the hard way. The problem San Antonio now faces: the Spurs can tell themselves they still have everything. They still have Victor Wembanyama. They still have a young core most franchises would trade their future for. They still have speed, length, size, upside, and a fan base that can feel the next era of San Antonio basketball arriving faster than anyone expected, but they no longer have Shawn Sweeney. And that is the uncomfortable part, because when a team rises that quickly, people always ask the same question: was it the players or was it the system? In San Antonio's case, the honest answer is both. Wembanyama is a generational defensive weapon. No coach can invent that kind of height, timing, reach, and instinct. But even the rarest weapon needs someone who knows where to point it. Sweeney knew. He understood how to use Victor without overusing him. He knew when to let him sit back and protect the paint, when to bring him higher, when to force ball handlers toward his shadow, and when to make opponents feel like every safe option had disappeared. That is not easy to replace. The danger for San Antonio is not that the defense suddenly collapses overnight. The Spurs are too talented for that. The danger is more subtle. One late rotation becomes two. One miscommunication becomes a blown coverage. One player stops trusting the next guy. The difference between an elite defense and a good defense is often not talent. It is precision. Sweeney gave them precision. Now Mitch Johnson has to prove that the habits are deep enough to remain. The players have to prove they did not just follow Sweeney's voice, but absorbed his principles. Wembanyama has to take another step, not only as the anchor of the defense, but as the person who carries its standards when the coach who built it is gone. That is how great teams survive losses. Like, they turn teaching into culture. Still, Spurs fans have every reason to feel nervous. Losing a role player is one thing. Losing a defensive architect is different. It is like keeping the house but losing the person who understood how every beam, wire, and wall was connected. San Antonio is still dangerous. Maybe even championship dangerous. But now comes the test nobody planned for. Can the Spurs remain a defensive monster after the mind that helped create the monster walks out the door? Orlando's gamble and the new NBA coaching era. Orlando's decision to hire Shawn Sweeney was not just a coaching change, it was a statement. The Magic were telling the rest of the league that they were done waiting, done being patient, done accepting the label of a young team with a bright future. At some point, a bright future has to become a dangerous present. And Orlando had reached that point. For years, the Magic had collected the kind of players every modern front office wants: size, length, versatility, defensive toughness, multiple ball handlers, wings who can attack mismatches, guards who can pressure the ball. On paper, they looked like the shape of a playoff problem, but they had not become the problem yet. That is the gamble with Sweeney. Orlando is betting that his mind can do for Banchero, Wagner, Suggs, and Bane what it helped do in other places: turn talent into a system, turn effort into identity, and turn playoff frustration into belief. They are betting that his defensive ideas are not just assistant coach ideas, but head coach ideas. They are betting that the man who helped build great structures can now run the whole building. That is a different challenge. As an assistant, Sweeney could focus on schemes, film, matchups, and development. As a head coach, he has to manage everything: rotations, egos, media pressure, losing streaks, star expectations, front office communication, playoff adjustments. The voice that sounds brilliant in a film room has to remain powerful across an entire season. That is why this hire is risky, but it is also why it feels modern. The NBA is changing. Teams are no longer only chasing famous names or recycled coaches with long resumes. They are looking for problem solvers, film room grinders, tactical minds, coaches who can walk into a roster and explain exactly why it is not working, then build a plan that players actually believe in. Sweeney represents that new wave. He is not being hired because he brings celebrity. He is being hired because he brings evidence. Milwaukee improved. Dallas defended better. San Antonio exploded. Everywhere he went, the same pattern followed. Young talent became more connected, more disciplined, and harder to play again. Now Orlando wants to be the next proof. And if Sweeney succeeds, this move may not just change the Magic. It may confirm that the NBA's next great coaches are not always found on the sideline spotlight. Sometimes they are built in the dark, frame by frame, possession by possession, until the whole league finally catches up. The lesson behind the move. In the end, Shawn Sweeney's exit is not really a story about betrayal. It is a story about what happens when preparation finally meets opportunity. For Spurs fans, the pain is understandable. Sweeney helped build something that felt special. He helped turn Wembanyama from a terrifying prospect into the anchor of a team that could make elite offenses look confused. He helped give San Antonio a new identity after the Popovich era, and just when that identity started to look championship ready, he was gone. That hurts. But the lesson is bigger than the loss. Great organizations do not only collect talent, they develop it. And sometimes, when they develop people too well, those people earn chances somewhere else. That is not failure. That is proof the environment worked. San Antonio helped give Sweeney the platform. Sweeney used that platform to show the league he was ready. Now, the Spurs have their own challenge. They must prove their culture is bigger than one coach. Wembanyama must keep growing as a leader, not just as a defender. Mitch Johnson must show that the system can evolve. The young core must turn what Sweeney taught them into habits that survive pressure, change, and expectation. That is how contenders are built. For Orlando, the lesson is different. Talent alone is not enough. Banchero, Wagner, Suggs, and Bane can become dangerous, but only if they accept the discipline that comes with winning. Sweeney is not arriving to protect feelings. He is arriving to demand details. The Magic wanted a new identity, and now they have hired a coach whose entire career has been about accountability, structure, and hard-earned trust. But for everyone watching, there is a human lesson too. Sometimes leaving is not disrespect. Sometimes ambition is not selfish. Sometimes the right move is painful because it comes before everyone is ready to say goodbye. Sweeney did not burn the bridge behind him. He finished the work in front of him, then stepped toward the responsibility he had spent years preparing for. That is what professionals do. The Spurs may still become a dynasty. The Magic may finally break through, and Sweeney's legacy may depend on what happens next, not what he left behind. So now I want to hear from you. Was Shawn Sweeney right to leave San Antonio for Orlando? Press 1 if you believe he made the right move. Press 2 if you think he should have stayed with Wembanyama. Press 3 if you think both teams can still win from this decision. And if you want more NBA stories with real context, strategy, and drama behind the headlines, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share this video with another basketball fan.